please welcome Alexandra Whittington to the Legacy Lounge podcast today. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much.
You have a fascinating career right now serving on the future of business team at Tata Consulting, a multinational consulting firm. You have studied futurology as a futurist, teaching it for 13 years at University of Houston. One course, the impact of technology on society. And most recently, you've been identified as one of the top 50 women futurists in the country by Forbes magazine. And upcoming in March, you'll be on a panel at South by Southwest. That should be a lot of fun. And it's a panel entitled Foresight Improv. Welcome. It's fascinating. So tell us, what is a futurist?
Well, as you can imagine, I get asked this question pretty often. So a futurist is someone who studies the future. And for that reason, I do often use the term futurology, as you mentioned. It's a really effective term. It tells you what it is, someone who studies the future, right? So by studying the future, what I mean is I'm constantly looking for information and how is information changing that tells us something about what the future might hold. And there's a lot of strategic insights involved when you do that kind of work, but it's also creative. It's also philosophical, and it's, as you can imagine, highly related to technology, right? We're looking at how technologies are evolving. So a futurist, well, the first thing that comes to mind sometimes is predicting the future. We don't necessarily predict a single future. What we like to do is talk about and entertain alternative futures, right? What are the possibilities? Just as there's no one single present, right? There's multiple presents, depending on where you live and how old you are and what your role in life is. There's multiple futures, right? So that's one of the first assumptions of being a futurist, is that there's multiple futures.
And the fact is, you believe that you can have a positive impact on the future. I think a lot of people conjure images of fortune tellers or fear-mongering. But this is truly a study, and it's based on a lot of research, I know. So how do you spend a typical day?
Well, my day as a futurist tends to vary, right? Depends what's going on that week. One of the advantages of being a futurist is that I get to learn about a whole variety of subjects, right? Whether it's science or, food, education, we get to talk about almost any topic. Every topic has a future, right? The future of blank, right? But on a typical day, I'll start my day usually by doing a lot of that signal searching that I talked about, right? Scanning, looking at news sites, things like social media, influencers, experts in an area, right? Currently, I'm looking at the future of customer experience. So I'm trying to find all those kind of customer guru people. They're out there, right? They write books, they go on podcasts. So what are the experts saying? Because experts are a great source of information about the future of a particular thing. So I'll kind of hone my research for the day, and then I'll spend the rest of the day usually doing podcasts like this or talking to an audience, maybe doing a webinar. There's a lot of education involved. I tend to think of it as a teaching job, even though I'm not really teaching anymore. I'm still teaching, right? I'm just teaching different audiences. Yeah.
And you can research so many different ways. And I know your academic background is intense studies and so forth. But now you make a great point. A lot of that's gathered in social media today. So you really have to kind of cover the gamut.
Yeah, well, unlike most academic researchers, futurists look at a range of sources. So we do go to the library every now and then. But by the time some information lands in the library, it's already pretty old. So we're looking for that really fresh content, right? Really new stuff. So rather than look in a book that was published 5 years ago, I'm going to go to an industry organization, like their website, and see what's the cutting edge. What are they presenting at their conference, right? What are the themes they're looking at? What is the news that they provide to their audiences?
Well, and information becomes obsolete so much more quickly today. And you combine that with anchoring, all of us kind of clinging to the past to look at the future. You just kind of switch that mindset entirely.
Definitely, yeah. Kind
Incredible.
of dropping our assumptions, and that's an important part of searching for signals and looking for resources. Try to find views that are different from yours, that challenge your own views, that challenge the conventional thinking. Right? Those can be some of the most important, even though they're on the fringe right now. Ideas that were once fringe 20, 30 years ago are now mainstream, right? Because
Great
over
point.
time they become integrated. So watching the fringes of society can be very important. What's bubbling up? What's starting anew? What are these kind of crazy ideas that right now it sounds crazy, but in 10 years we may all be buying into it because it's been, absorbed into society.
Right.
So, I spend a lot of time researching, a lot of time sorting through trends, parsing through information, and then sharing that with audiences, whether it's through writing, through speaking, through our consulting engagements, and different conferences and events. So there's a lot of communication, a lot of learning, and a lot of analysis involved in being a futurist.
You made a really good point about reading even things that you may not agree with.
Yep.
And that's part of both sides analysis. We can get locked into a belief and only read things that reinforce what we already believe.
Exactly.
So shifting that is so important, isn't it, to be able to see out what the impact of things will be.
And one of the most famous, well-known futurists, Alvin Toffler, who wrote Future Shock back in the early 70s, I think, maybe the late 60s when Future Shock came out. Honestly, I can't remember, but it was a seminal book in the area of future studies. It was a bestseller. It was a pop book. Alvin Toffler was on talk shows. He was a little celebrity there for a while, and he went on to have a very successful career. And he introduced this term of unlearning in that book. There's a wonderful quote.
Great term.
That we need to unlearn so much. So when you go to sources that either contradict or confront or in some way just challenge your traditional thinking, that's unlearning, right? And that's what we need to do more of, because we do get locked into our usual way of thinking, and that's what prevents, it can hold back innovation, right? It can hold back creativity, and it can stifle new thinking and new ideas.
Stifle and scare. Whereas if you're really looking toward the future, you're looking for a positive outcome. And that's what's impressive, I think.
Yeah. Well, it has both sides. Futurists we deal with the fears and the hopes at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be able to balance that.
Great.
But I think primarily futurists, the advantage of working with a futurist or being a futurist or thinking futuristically is that we can learn more about influencing the future. Because as you start to get familiar with the signals and scanning and seeing what's happening, you start to see where the leverage points are, right? Like, there's an opportunity there, or there's a weakness there, or there's something that needs to happen here that it's not real clear yet what it is, but these uncertainties are benign forms of opportunity, right? They just haven't really awakened yet. So if I'm looking to start a business, or if I'm interested in, what should be my next step in my career, this can be a really valuable way of investigating that, right? What's bubbling up, what's not quite to the mainstream, and how do I be an early adopter of that? Yeah.
So in your research, and we could go many directions with this, but what megatrends do you see a lot of signaling in right now?
Probably the most relevant megatrend that I can think of right now is the demographic shifts that have been underway for decades. But we're starting to feel the effects of what happens when the largest generation in history, the baby boomers, start to reach their older years, right? That is having a tremendous impact on our healthcare system, on our, social safety nets, on our housing, on the job market. There's a number of ways that this very large older generation, this is in the U.S. that I'm talking about, but that same phenomena exists globally. In Western Europe, we've all heard about, what's been going on in Japan with their aging society. China, which is
China, you've mentioned in your work,
a huge country where they have, they're now dealing with the ramifications of a 20, 30-year-old population policy that was known as the one-child policy, and now they're realizing they don't have the young people that they need to support their workforce, to support their economic system.
And they didn't have to look at an actuarial lifespan of 100 years old. And so many societies are simply caught off guard by how much we need to focus on elder care.
Absolutely. The cost of elder care, the commitment to elder care, because it's not just, elder care, it's not just hospitals and doctors. There's mental health, there's physical, just longevity stuff, getting outside, getting mobility, being able to socialize. There's a whole, it's not just making sure we keep them alive.
Right. It's
but,
socialization.
all of
and
it.
There are monetary considerations, and you have done some interesting work on China about how they adapt to housing in terms of the way they move from one community to. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's one of those signals that I was looking at recently. I thought it was super interesting that the elderly Chinese community. Now, these are the more affluent.
Okay.
Which is another new phenomena, right? I mean, you might see that as a mega trend, right? The rising of the Eastern affluent consumer or family or whatever individual as a result of globalization, which allowed Eastern societies to raise their standard of living. There's a growing middle class there. Well, now these affluent retirees have adopted this sort of migratory lifestyle, right? They're not working, they have grandkids around the country. So they're sort of moving from place to place, going to different hotels seasonally almost. They call them the migratory birds. They have this kind of symbolism in the popular culture where they're talking about the older folks or the migratory birds going from this part to that part, just moving around in their leisurely, retirement. But it's putting different strains on society, right? Because they all will decide to go to let's say a festival, an event that's happening in one region. And then that puts a lot of pressure on the hotels, on the restaurant, the different areas. You don't know where they're going to go next. So the different areas are having to improvise around providing the services that they need, and that includes healthcare. So, there's a lot of creative ways of dealing with this demographic shift that we're facing. Another option, and it's almost kind of funny, and some of these things just kind of tickle you, and that's how you know this is a kind of a signal, there's something happening. But this idea of like living on a cruise ship, right? That it might be cheaper to just put yourself on a cruise after cruise after cruise in your old age rather than try to find a nursing home. And I imagine some people do that. And they do, yeah. And there's different stuff.
You get a good dock on the ship. That's a good thing.
You can socialize. You have a meal plan. You're going places. So the creative ideas about how we're going to spend our retirement could be being forged right now by this large experiment we have in an older population that lives well, lives long, has a lot of years left ahead of them,
and
we have
truly
excellent
lives
healthcare.
as many years in retirement as they did in their active career. So it's two lives, in effect. Yeah.
It's two lives, and this is the first time we've seen it because we finally reached where we have this high standard of living to do that. So, new older in life experiences are being formed right now, whether it's migratory or living on a cruise ship or whatever it might be.
Interesting.
But I think that demographic change will, no business, no industry will go untouched by this shift, because the other side of that coin is fewer young people, fewer kids, fewer schools, fewer teachers. As you start connecting the dots, you see the snowball effect, how one shift has a lot of little implications that touch on so many areas.
Many visionaries have pointed to artificial intelligence as the most dramatic shift since the introduction of electricity. That's pretty significant. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just start by sharing a really impactful quote by Stephen Hawking, one of the scientists who is really highly associated with AI. And it was just a few years ago that he said, AI will either be the best thing or the last thing to happen to humanity. And so it's a really extreme, precipice that we're at here. It's either going to be really great or it's not going to be so good. That's the way a lot of people have looked at it. I don't know that, it's black and white as that quote suggests, but it certainly is a paradox, right? AI is, first of all, there's no really good definition for what AI is. And I find that very interesting. We are very familiar now with these large language models like ChatGPT, the other ones, there's a number of them coming out now. And that's a version of AI that people have now gotten familiar with and comfortable with. But there's all sorts of AI that we've actually been interacting with for years. The spell checker on your phone, the GPS in your car. AI has been around. In fact, AI has been around for 80 years, right? It's not exactly new, but it's been on this disrupted trajectory where it hasn't been able to evolve to its full fruition. And it may not for hundreds of years yet, right? It's still a really big uncertainty going into the future. But my view of AI is that it is something that we can really benefit from. I think that it's all about how we use it. I think it's really going to give life to that phrase, you know, garbage in, garbage out, that old computing phrase that people have been saying for 40 years. But it's very true with AI because it learns from what you teach it, right? From what you expose it to. I think in many ways AI, we have to almost think of it as a child, right? It's going to learn what it's shown. It's going to copy what it sees.
It's machine learning.
And in many ways, the AIs that we're used to, they're modeled on the human brain, right? That large language model is based, you know, they base it all on these neural networks and stuff, the way that they're designed. So it is meant to represent the way we think.
And I think you have spoken to the fact that there's even a certain mindset when it comes to learning, and that there are AI gender implications right now.
Absolutely.
Can you speak to that?
And that's what I mean by it learns what it sees, right? Because when we're using AI, let's say, you know, these chat GPTs and these LLMs that we're experimenting with these days, it is picking up on what you teach it. So the fact that most of the content that they've been trained on has been produced in the past, you know, 20, 30 years, it's all the stuff it's getting off the internet, books, websites, articles, it's going to reinforce whatever it learned from that, whatever that tells it. And since we know that gender equality has been an issue for the past 20 or 30 years, that's going to be I hate to say regurgitated, but regurgitated by the AI, right? We can run the risk of reinforcing inequalities, right? Injustices, all sorts of negative aspects of our society.
Repeating the past.
Exactly, through AI.
So how do we adjust that?
Well, at the same time, AI can be used to discover new things, right? It's being used to discover new drugs, for example. They're using AI to discover new materials, right? Because it can parse through so much data. So perhaps it can come up with new ways of working, for example, in the workplace that help to eliminate gender inequality, right? So I don't know how we can eliminate it, but I think some ways is, you know, first of all, programming it that way. And that might involve increasing the number of women that work on AI, right? Because part of the reason there's a bias within artificial intelligence that you might call the male bias is because the great majority of people who build AI and create AI are men. And they're, you know, the same kind of men that went to some of the best schools and studied, you know, data science. And they're all coming from a very, you know, small group of people. So if we can expand the workforce, the people that develop these technologies, there's a better chance of it not, you know, just reinforcing the past.
And repeating biases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Most importantly.
Very interesting. How do you think the COVID and the pandemic what's the impact that it's left on society from a futurist standpoint?
A really big one. And you don't need a futurist to tell you that, right? I think we all know that COVID is just one of those things often known as a catalyst event or a wild card event in the futurist language. And these are things that, you know, once they happen, there's a before and there's an after. It's a bookmark in time, right? We're always going to think
That's
of
a great way
pre
to
and the
phrase it.
post-COVID, right? It's a point in time that, you know, just like World War II, just like you know, the American Revolution, other serious events in the past. We always think about the pre and the post of that particular thing. So I think COVID is definitely one of those things. And to me, one of the most, well, I was actually just reading about this. Since 2020, disability claims in the United States have absolutely skyrocketed. Absolutely skyrocketed. Disability claims to employers, to social services. Disability it needs to be on everyone's radar right now, because it's not just, you know, that people are getting older, but now that we've had this COVID event, you know, you combine that demographic change, the aging society, the megatrend.
Well, and it, you know, there could be as much mental health as there is physical health problems as a result.
You just hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what the article I just read was talking about. It's the mental and physical combined, right? The stress, the emotional, all of those combined has made COVID just such a huge demarcator, right?
For a while, the divorce rate increased during COVID, I recall.
Yes, there was a divorce boom.
And the divorce rate is higher among people in their late 50s than any other group in society right now. And maybe some of that perpetuated by COVID, you think? Or
I would definitely think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I would, because it was really hard on family structures, right? On women being able to work, with all the schools closed and the daycares closed.
Parents becoming teachers as well as caregivers at home.
Yeah. So I think that, it's definitely stretched the fabric of society is one way you might put it. And I don't think it's going to go away very soon. It's going to take generations, I think, for us to get past some of the byproducts, some of the lingering effects, not just health-wise, socially, economically. That's probably the most surface level. It's clear to see the economic impact. We can look at a graph and see how did things fluctuate.
Right.
But, putting your pulse on the finger of how it affects, putting your finger on the pulse of how it affects society is a little bit more nuanced, because it really depends on where did you live, what was your situation during COVID, and
Absolutely.
And there was a lot of transformation there too. So I think we're going to be seeing the effects unfold for a very long time, just as with the previous pandemic of 1918, I think, was that first flu pandemic.
I can't remember the exact
big
date,
one.
but
There were a lot of changes that resulted from that we still have today that we don't really think about. Things like the way our homes are designed and the way schools are set up. There was a number of things that changed then that lingered.
it was just, you're right, as a bookmark. I mean, it changed the way we live, work. It touched every facet of our lives. And you're right, it's kind of before COVID and after COVID is indelibly etched. So thank you for that. What would you say about the caring society that you've talked a little bit about in some of your work, some of your research?
Yeah, I think now, as opposed to a mega trend, which is a really big thing that pretty much everyone knows about. Doesn't shock anyone when I come in here and say aging society, right? We're like, yeah, we know. But the caring society, the caring economy is something that's very emerging, I think. It's a growing part of the economy. And when I say economy, I'm talking about work. I'm talking about productivity and labor and the and human activity around caring, whether it's education, whether it's home health care, whether it's health care in the regular setting, or whether it's the work of being a mother or a daughter or, a family member to someone that has caring needs, right? That needs some
And
sort
a lot
of
of people
assistance.
refer to the sandwich generation because women are taking care of teenagers and so forth, but at the same time they're caring for their aging parents.
Definitely.
And they're kind of caught in that. And it takes a lot of energy and time, doesn't it?
There was an interesting article recently that talked about the statistic. I want to say it was 40%. They said 40% of Americans are moonlighting as a caregiver at night for free. And it's not that you're moonlighting for free, but what it means is that when you get home from your paid job, then you've got hours and hours of work to do when it comes to taking care of others who need your help. And it's not a negative thing. I mean, the reason it's called the caring economy is because they care, right? We're doing it for people we care about. Now, there are paid versions of this work, like I mentioned, teachers, nurses, home health care aides, that kind of thing. But the point is that as our society ages and as we recover from COVID, caring is becoming very much more important, either as a job area, a workforce need, or as a personal skill and a time management area that all of us need to possibly take into consideration, whether you're in the sandwich generation or if you're, a young person that, maybe you lost so many relatives to COVID. The caring aspect now for you is represented through volunteering or something, right? Being able to give back in some way. So there's a lot of human activity around caring, whether it's paid or unpaid, whether it's your family or strangers, that's really building as a force.
And even when it is paid, I don't think society has really begun to recognize the value of it.
Yes.
And that, so fewer people are drawn to it, or the amount it costs is cost prohibitive. And it's all part of this aging demographic that we just haven't embraced.
Exactly. And those jobs are not well paid. They're very high in demand, but not well paid.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to be dominated by women, right? It's a women's field, being a home care nurse, being a preschool teacher, all of those areas, and taking care of kids or taking care of older people. I mean, we know it usually falls on women and families. Yep. So, there's a gender issue there too that I'd like to highlight. AI may be one of the ways out of that. When you think about the first wave of, or I guess it was the second wave of feminism in the 1950s, it was very much a byproduct of the rise of the home consumer appliance, right? The washing machine, the refrigerator, the microwave oven. All of those things gave women more time to pursue their own interests, whether that was work or some education or whatever it was they wanted to do. Being untethered from a lot of those domestic chores really contributed to that wave of women's liberation in the 60s, 50s, 60s,
and productivity
70s.
In their own terms.
Totally.
Which is, so it's not a stretch to think about robots helping us in healthcare, home care.
Yeah.
There are robotic pets now that the elderly are using. So
it's a wonderful example. Exactly. How do we fill that gap? Of caring, of human need, not to dehumanize the person that needs caring, but to take some of the load off and spread it a little bit more equitably, just like a washing machine did, right? Using a washing machine didn't mean you loved your kids less, right? Just because you weren't hand washing their clothes, it just meant that you had more time to help them with their homework instead of wash the clothes, right? So I think AI and all of these modern technologies have a lot of promise in that area. Maybe it can be a new form of, women's freedom of expression and freedom in society and economic liberation, all those kinds of things.
I think it would be just a great place, to begin. Robots in the house are probably not on everyone's list, but it's not a stretch, I think, given what we need to take care of the growing number of aged.
Absolutely.
Are there any trends that you feel are underrepresented, anything that's a passion of yours? Because a lot of people are spending time on AI, I think, but there are many trends that affect the future.
Definitely. And, I really like to interject the low-tech things because we do hear a lot about technology. So it's interesting to think about what else is happening out there. And I'll share one of them with you. A big trend that I love to talk about is biophilia. Biophilia, which just means love of nature. But there's an area now called biophilic design. And it's all about infusing spaces, places with nature. So, it's a big design trend that you've seen for years now, where you have a lot of house plants, you have a lot of green, there's a lot of,
and
neutral
even
colors.
living walls.
Thank you.
Popular.
Yes, yep. The living wall, the water features, having air purification or even aromatherapy, using our environment in a natural way to stimulate wellness, because basically what they're finding, the reason it's so important is because nature helps people heal. It helps you be more creative. It helps you think better. It helps students learn. So in schools where they have big windows with lots of natural light, kids are doing better. So now schools can be designed with biophilic principles to improve outcomes. Businesses and places of work can be healthier, right, and more conducive to productivity, and also conducive to healthy work-life balance.
And maybe even some of that from COVID, because people working in their homes felt such comfort, and then coming back to an office environment was stark for some.
Yes.
So we're wanting both our homes and our offices to be comfortable. Wow, that's a really interesting, I'm sure some of our investors will want to learn more about that, so that's great. If one looked at this career, which is heavily based on research, and it's the study of the future, how would they get started as a young, professional? How would they get started in the field?
And that's a really good question, and that's something I do get asked a lot. And first of all, I encourage anyone listening, please feel free to reach out to me if this is something that interests you. There's just a ton of ways of going about it. I would always start with reading, right? Just start looking up some futurists. What are they writing about? Figure out what part of the future interests you and how you think you would want to integrate it into your life. Because you can commit to a master's degree, as I did, right? I earned a master's degree in the study of the future. You can attend a one afternoon course on Coursera or one of those, or on LinkedIn, one of those online pre-taped webinars, and you can learn a lot from something like that.
And in Houston, the University of Houston has a long history
Yes.
of study as in futurology, right?
Exactly. Yes, we
Great.
do. The graduate program there is celebrating its 50th year this year. So for the past 50 years, people have been coming to Houston really until the last 15 years or so, when courses were available online, right? Started becoming available online. People from all over the world would come to Houston to learn how to be a futurist.
And now it's really evolving into something that corporations seek out, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. All the big companies are now looking to hire a futurist. They're seeing the advantages of having someone that can look around corners, right? That can think differently and that can watch that horizon and integrate that into the rest of their business, whether it's media and PR type stuff or if it's actual innovation, investing. There's a number of ways that it's being used, and it's really growing. Since the pandemic, it's growing quite a lot.
Yeah. We had really an investment team that spoke yesterday, and while they don't necessarily call it futurology, I mean, they have to identify those trends. Yeah. And so what companies are looking for is to institutionalize that, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how is your team set up?
Well, our team is part of the consulting group, mm-hmm. right? And we talk to clients mainly in, these kind of workshop settings or speaking event settings. A lot of the ways that we bring benefit to our clients is to open their minds, the unlearning piece, right?
Right.
So say that a group within TCS wants to work with their client on like a day of brainstorming and thinking of, innovation ideas, new mm-hmm. products, services, all that. They'll often bring us in to start the day, and we'll give them a presentation that touches on the future of their topic, banking, insurance, whatever it might be, but also talks about that bigger picture, right? The really much more important bigger picture, which is that all of these things are converging. It's not just technology, right? There's economic, there's social. So we try to highlight, the futurist mindset to get people prepared to then really creatively explore what can they offer in the business world. How can they work in business ecosystems, right? To do things in a partnership fashion, not competition, but cooperation, right? We really tend to encourage that viewpoint. And also, just thinking more holistically about the long-term view on the economy, on society, the demographic stuff, sustainability, right? We definitely highlight those.
And things changing so quickly, it's, we're grappling with these problems fast. And so, being able to bring some sense and also avoid the fears that mm-hmm. prevent us from overcoming obstacles. It's really important.
Yeah,
I can see where it will grow mm-hmm. within many companies. And would you say that a large percentage of large companies do employ futurists?
I wouldn't say a large percentage, but a growing percentage. A definitely growing percentage.
It makes absolute sense.
And you see it year after year. I see more and more companies putting out these job ads for, a futurist or a foresight specialist or a future, trend watcher, or, these different terms.
We're
that
all
adds
recognizing
up to
that you have to think differently if you're going to solve the problems. I mean, environmentally, as we reach tipping points with our water and our energy, we've got to think differently, right?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Solutions are not going to be based on what we've done in the past, right? We need all new solutions for what we're facing now because it's mm-hmm. so many things. Some people have called it the poly crisis or the perma crisis, which is not very positive to hear, but it's true, right? We have one set of issues wrapped up in another set of issues wrapped up in another set of issues, and they all sort of tend to be intertwined.
That's the poly, the many crisis. Okay.
Yeah, and then when we pull one string here, well, how does that domino effect on other areas? So, complexity is recognized. In the business world now, we can really see everything's very interconnected. So we have to act, with intention and with foresight, essentially.
If you could think of maybe the best piece of advice or the worst piece of advice, either way, that you've gotten, what would you share with people?
Best piece of advice or the worst?
Either way.
I would say, the worst piece of advice, and I don't know if this is advice, but it's the worst thing you can say is, that's not possible. That's not possible. We'll never do that. That'll never happen. I don't know if that's advice, but when you have someone say that to you, it is. And the only reason we can't imagine it happening in the future is because it hasn't happened in the past. That's something I'm really convinced of. And just as
very interesting,
a quick example, I was thinking about, locally, I just took my kids down to Galveston, and before that 1900 hurricane, Galveston was the booming city of the South. It was the Wall Street of the region, right? They had a bustling population. They were a shipping center. They had the port. They had very wealthy, people and bankers and all sorts of, basically it was a booming city. Right. And it changed overnight.
And a natural event
wiped out Galveston. And if you had told someone in 1899, Galveston's not going to be the big city, it's going to be Houston. Houston's going to be the biggest city in Texas. It's going to be an economic powerhouse. It's going to be the center of the state, right? Not the capital, but it's going to be, the economic center of our state. They wouldn't have believed you,
right?
Because Houston was nothing then. Houston had nothing going for it. But because of what happened to Galveston, almost overnight, Houston was able to take the place of being the biggest city.
Not too far future, we might have to recognize that it might not be Earth, but in fact, it might be space that is part of our future. And I think most people have taken, that can't happen. But I think that we need to be open vessels.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Incredible. You mentioned books, Future Shock by Alvin Toffler. Is there any other book that is a favorite or that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, here lately, I've been really interested in the ideas of Strauss and Howe, who are the authors of The Fourth Turning. That book is, probably almost 30 years old. So there's a new version. One of the authors is deceased, but the one that's still living has written a new version called The Fourth Turning is Here. So it's a nice little update to that book. I still recommend The Fourth Turning, but if you only read one, read the new one. I think came out last year.
Can you give us just a glimpse of what The Fourth Turning
The Fourth Turning is super interesting. The authors are historians.
Okay.
So they study the cycles of the past, is the spin that they put on history. And what they've devised is this theory called the Fourth Turning, which talks about how there's these repeating 4 cycles, or this one cycle of 4 phases that repeats throughout time.
Okay. That
is represented through generations. So it talks about how every 80 or so years we have a turning, and we're due for one right now. We're either in it, or it's about to happen, or it's just happened. Not really sure, but we're in the midst of a turning at this time. And the last time we had a turning was at the end of World War II. So if that gives you an idea, it's one of those bookmark type things, right?
Fascinating.
So they talk about the generations, how each generation works in a turning, through our different life phases, because, obviously we always belong to the same generation, but there's a time when we're young, then we're old, then, we're the elders of society. So they talk about how the different generations function within those turnings, and the different phases involve things like, prosperity and decline. Basically, it's very kind of a natural cycle, you might say. It rises and then it falls. But what's interesting about theirs is how they integrate the generational part. So I'm talking baby boomers, Gen X, all that kind of stuff.
Baby boomers.
Yeah. All those are
but
players.
There's so many inflection points that are kind of coming together right now that it's not hard to believe that we are at kind of the precipice of something very new and different. So
that's what I really like
that's
about
a great
it.
suggestion, Alex. We really appreciate it. Alex, thank you for gracing the Legacy Lounge today. It was fascinating learning about futurology and your consultancy role. And most of all, we look forward to hearing more and learning more at your panel, South by Southwest.
Well, thank you so much, and it was great being with you. Thanks again.